It was 500,000 years later when the silence of Earth was finally broken. For countless ages, the planet had waited without a witness, carrying the weight of forgotten histories beneath its soil. The oceans still moved, the winds still crossed the mountains, and the forests, though changed, still whispered in the language of rustling leaves. Yet the ones who had once filled this world with voices, inventions, and dreams were gone. Humanity had disappeared. From far across the universe, a vessel descended. It was not human. Its shape, smooth and silver, reflected the pale light of the sun as it slowed its approach toward the surface. The travelers inside were not conquerors, not raiders, they were seekers. For centuries they had wondered what had become of this blue planet, spoken of in old maps and legends. To them, Earth was a mystery, a place where fragile beings once rose beyond their limits. The ship touched down on cracked soil, where once a city had stood. Dust rose slowly into the thin air, carrying with it the faint smell of stone and rust. The explorers stepped out, their movements careful, their senses alert. They expected to find a wasteland, a world where nature reclaimed what weak hands had built. Instead, what they saw left them silent. Before them stood the bones of towers, half buried yet stubborn against time. Wide roads stretched into the distance, though broken and swallowed by roots. Machines, shaped in ways the explorers had never seen, lay scattered as though waiting for their masters to return. What startled them most was not destruction, it was preservation. Humanity had not simply lived here. It had shaped this world in ways the travelers could not yet understand. They walked slowly among the ruins, their feet pressed against stone carved with strange symbols. They found statues standing tall, their faces worn smooth by wind but still holding a kind of pride. In the shadows of those structures they felt something unusual, an echo. It was as if the ground itself remembered the hands that built, the minds that dreamed. Strange, one whispered, looking at the sky now filled with fragments of metallic rings, remains of something vast that once circled the planet. This does not look like a people who only survived. This looks like a people who built supremacy. The others nodded. They had studied many worlds. On most, life fought to survive by instinct, by natural strength. But here, signs of deliberate engineering were everywhere. Oceans had been redirected by massive channels. Deserts had been pierced with reservoirs and underground systems that still carried water. Even the mountains bore scars of shaping, as if someone had cut into the earth to make it serve their needs. It was not raw possession of the world. It was mastery crafted by design. As they moved deeper into the ruins, they uncovered devices that, though silent, looked far more advanced than their own. A sphere of glass still glowed faintly when touched. A thin screen flickered with images from a time long past. Faces, laughter, voices singing in languages the explorers could not understand. It was as though the humans had left behind a gallery of their existence, fragments scattered but not forgotten. For the travelers, this discovery was unsettling. They had always believed power came from inheritance, from strength given by nature. Yet here was a species that had been small, fragile, easily broken, and still they had remade their world. They recorded everything. Every stone, every fragment of machine, every trace of writing. They were careful not to disturb too much, for they sensed this place was not simply abandoned. It was waiting. Waiting to tell a story. At night, when the stars shone above the empty planet, the explorers gathered on a hill that overlooked a ruined city. Fires burned faintly in the distance, not from humans, but from the earth itself, cracks in the soil glowing with heat. From that height, they could see the pattern of the city below. The streets were not random. They formed shapes, precise and thoughtful, like a mind had laid them out with patience. It is not just survival, one of them said quietly. This species engineered its way to supremacy. They did not wait for power, they built it. The thought weighed heavily on all of them. Because if such a fragile species could rise so high, what did it mean for the others in the universe? The explorers continued their journey, crossing rivers that still flowed along channels carved by human hands. They found bridges standing even when the cities they connected had fallen. They entered halls made of stone where echoes of voices still lingered. Some places looked untouched, as though people had just stepped away for a moment never to return. They found gardens hidden under layers of soil, with roots that still grew from engineered seeds. They discovered libraries carved into the earth, filled with strange patterns and codes no one yet understood. Each discovery added to the mystery. Humanity had not only lived, they had prepared, and yet they were gone. The explorers could not understand it. How could a people so determined, so inventive, vanish from the very world they had shaped? On their last day of the first expedition, they stood before a towering monument. It rose higher than the ruins around it, its surface engraved with countless marks, worn but still visible. The symbols told a story, though the explorers could not read it. They only knew it was important, left there for whoever might come next. The leader of the group placed a hand on the stone, feeling the faint warmth trapped within. They wanted to be remembered, the leader said softly. They knew their time would end, and so they carved their voice into the bones of their world. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the silent city, the explorers felt the weight of what they had found. Earth was not a graveyard, it was a message. A message that humanity had existed, had risen, and had left behind proof of its strength. They left their camp that night with their hearts unsettled. The silence of Earth was no longer emptiness. It was filled with echoes, with lessons they did not yet fully understand. Far above, their ship waited in orbit, watching the blue planet turn slowly. 500,000 years after humanity had vanished, the Earth was still alive with stories, and the explorers knew this was only the beginning. The explorers returned the next day, carrying tools to look deeper into the ruins. They were no longer only curious. They were restless, eager to understand what had truly happened here. The silence of Earth felt heavy, almost as though the planet itself was guarding secrets. They began their search in a place that had once been a great city. Its wide streets stretched in straight lines, lined with broken lamps that no longer glowed. Buildings stood like empty shells, their walls cracked but still holding their shapes. Nature had started to take over. Trees grew from windows, vines crawled up stairways, roots broke through stone. Yet the city was not completely gone. Its bones were strong, like the will of those who had built it. Inside one of the taller structures, they found something extraordinary. A large hall, its walls covered with faded pictures. Though time had worn them down, the explorers could see shapes of people, standing together, working together, celebrating. These were not scenes of war or conquest. They were images of families, of children playing, of people holding tools and building something larger than themselves. For a long moment, no one spoke. The travelers simply stared, realizing that humanity's strength had not only been in invention but in connection. "Look at them," one said softly. They lived for more than survival. They lived for each other. As they moved deeper, they found objects that still carried traces of human hands. A book made of thin sheets with marks they could not read. A device that, when touched, hummed faintly, as though it wanted to awaken. A screen that for a second flickered with moving shapes, faces speaking in voices long gone. The explorers were startled. They had studied other worlds before, but rarely had they seen such determination to leave behind memories. It was as if humanity had refused to vanish quietly. They had written their existence into every corner of their world. Later, they entered a chamber beneath the city. It was dark, the air heavy, but their lights revealed rows of machines lined neatly along the walls. Many were broken, their surfaces rusted, yet some still glowed with faint energy. When the explorers touched them, images appeared, maps of Earth, patterns of stars, lines of information stored in codes they could not fully understand. It was then they realized humanity had tried to speak to the future. These machines were not just tools. They were messages. The humans had wanted someone, anyone, to know who they were, what they had built, and why they had lived. For the explorers, it was a humbling moment. They had come expecting to find a primitive world long abandoned. Instead, they had found a voice reaching across 500,000 years. One of them whispered almost in awe. They wanted to be remembered. They refused to be lost in silence. The deeper they looked, the more they found signs of humanity's story. They uncovered bridges stretching across rivers, still strong despite the passing ages. They found carved stones with patterns too precise to be accidents. They found devices so advanced that even they, with all their knowledge, could not understand their full purpose. But what moved them most were the small things. A child's toy buried in dust, a piece of music frozen in a machine that played only a faint, broken melody, a set of tools worn from use, showing the hands of someone who had worked hard every day. These small traces made humanity feel alive again, as if the people had only stepped away for a moment. The explorers began to feel something they had not expected. respect. They had believed that only the strongest inherited supremacy, but here was proof that greatness could be built. Humanity had not been the strongest or the fastest, but they had risen higher than anyone thought possible, by creating, by learning, by refusing to give up. At night, as they camped among the ruins, the travelers spoke quietly to one another. They wondered what it must have been like to live here, to walk these streets when they were alive with voices. They imagined the lights glowing at night, the sound of laughter echoing between the buildings, the feeling of belonging to something greater. One of them looked at the broken skyline and said, perhaps they were not only trying to rule their world, perhaps they were trying to understand it, to leave something better than what they were given. This thought stayed with them. The next morning, they explored further and discovered an underground chamber hidden beneath layers of soil. Inside, they found walls lined with strange symbols and pictures. Unlike the fading paintings in the city above, these had been carefully sealed and preserved. The images told stories: humans farming, building ships, flying into the skies, reaching beyond the planet into the stars. The explorers stood in silence, realizing they were watching humanity's journey, captured and saved as if the people knew someone someday would find it. It was not a story of conquest. It was a story of effort, of trial, of endless progress. In one image, they saw hands reaching out to one another across oceans, across time. It was a message of unity, carved deep enough to outlast 500,000 years. For the travelers, this was the moment they truly understood. Humanity had not been born with supremacy. They had created it piece by piece through choices and struggles, and though they were gone, their echo still lived in every stone, every machine, every mark left behind. By the time the explorers left the chamber, the silence of Earth no longer felt empty. It felt alive, filled with voices whispering from the past. They carried with them not only records of what they had found, but a sense of responsibility. Humanity had left behind more than ruins. They had left behind proof that weakness could become strength, and that even fragile beings could rise higher than the stars if they dared to dream. As the explorers prepared to return to their ship, one of them paused, looking back at the city bathed in golden sunlight. The ruins stood proud even in silence. They are not gone, the traveler said. They are still here. Every stone, every mark carries their voice. Humanity still speaks. And with that they left, carrying the echoes of humanity with them, knowing that this was only the beginning of the story the planet was waiting to tell. The explorers had thought they had seen everything. Ruined cities, carved monuments, devices whispering fragments of memory. Each discovery revealed a little more of humanity's greatness. Yet something told them there was still more. Something hidden, something deeper. On their third week of exploration, they found an entrance. It was buried beneath a mountain of collapsed stone and soil, but its design was too precise to be natural. The doorway was sealed with thick slabs, but markings along its surface suggested purpose, not chance. With effort, the travelers cleared the rubble, their lights flickering against the smooth surface of metal beneath. When the barrier finally gave way, a gust of stale air rushed out, carrying with it the scent of earth and old machinery. What lay beyond was a tunnel stretching into darkness. Unlike the ruins above, this place had been preserved as if waiting for someone to return. They stepped cautiously inside. The walls were smooth, lined with faded lights that still pulsed faintly when touched. The ground was firm, covered in patterns that seemed to guide their steps forward. As they walked deeper, the silence grew heavier. It was no longer the silence of abandonment. It was the silence of something watching, something holding its breath. At the end of the tunnel, they entered a vast chamber. Their lights revealed row upon row of machines, larger than anything they had seen before. Towers of metal reached up into the shadows. Panels covered in strange symbols lined the walls. Some machines still flickered with faint energy, humming softly like a distant heartbeat. The explorers stood frozen. This was not just another ruin. This was something different. One of them whispered, "This is an engine, a hidden one. Look at the size of it. It's like they built the heart of their world down here." They spread out, touching the panels, scanning the machines, trying to understand. The more they saw, the clearer it became. This was a project designed to last, a system meant to outlive the people who built it. Through broken fragments of records, they pieced together the story. Humanity had realized their time was limited. Perhaps it was the planet changing, or disasters they could not stop, or conflicts too great to overcome. But instead of surrendering to fate, they built this, the core project. It was not a weapon. It was not a throne of power. It was a caretaker. The machines here had been designed to regulate the planet, to keep water flowing, to manage air, to preserve seeds, and to store knowledge. Humanity had created a hidden engine not to dominate but to protect. It was their way of ensuring that even if they vanished, their world would not die with them. The explorers were stunned. They had studied civilizations across the stars, and most had built monuments to their own pride. But humanity had done something different. They had built a monument to survival itself, a system that served not their egos but the future. As they explored deeper into the chamber, they found glowing orbs storing vast amounts of information. When touched, they revealed images. Maps of Earth's surface, designs of cities, libraries of music, records of languages, art, and science. Humanity had poured its memory into these cores, hoping someone someday would find them. One explorer stood silently before one of the glowing orbs, listening to a faint melody that echoed from within. It was simple, yet filled with emotion. It was the sound of people who had refused to be forgotten. Another found a recording of voices speaking words in rhythm, perhaps a poem, perhaps a farewell. Though they could not understand the language, the tone carried meaning. It was the sound of hope. And as they stood there, surrounded by these echoes, the explorers began to feel something they had never felt before: closeness. It was as if the humans themselves were still here, guiding them through what they had left behind. For hours, the travelers studied the machines. They discovered systems designed to restart themselves every few centuries, to keep working until the very end. They saw reservoirs of seeds carefully stored in cold chambers, each labeled with symbols. They found designs for machines that could repair themselves, guardians to keep the core alive long after humanity was gone. The explorers realized this was more than engineering. It was love. Humanity had loved their world so deeply that they built a way to care for it long after their hands were gone. As they rested in the chamber, one of the travelers spoke quietly, almost as if afraid to break the silence. They did not vanish in weakness. They prepared. They built something that could outlast even their own existence. That is not the act of a dying people, that is the act of vision. The others nodded. They were beginning to see humanity not as victims of time, but as creators of legacy. Supremacy had not been handed to them. They had forged it in the fire of struggle and then passed it forward to the future. Over the next days, they uncovered more secrets of the core project. They learned how the humans had come together, different groups, different lands, different tongues, to build this hidden heart of the Earth. It had taken years, perhaps centuries, but they had worked side by side to create something bigger than themselves. This unity left the explorers deeply moved. Their own species had often fought, often believed in superiority through strength. But here was proof that true supremacy could come through unity, through a shared dream. Before they left, the travelers stood together in the center of the chamber. Above them, machines hummed faintly. Around them, the walls glowed with fragments of human memory. One of them spoke. "We came here thinking this world had been abandoned, but it has not. It is still alive with their touch. Humanity is still here in every machine, in every plan, in every heartbeat of this core." And as they walked back through the tunnel into the fading sunlight, they carried with them more than just records. They carried the realization that humanity's supremacy had never been about possession. It had been about vision, about building something that could endure when everything else was gone. The silence of Earth felt different now. It no longer seemed like emptiness. It felt like a voice, speaking softly through machines and memories, reminding them of what had been built here. And for the first time, the explorers wondered if humanity had engineered their supremacy here. What might they have done if they had survived? How far could they have gone if time had been kinder? That question lingered with them, echoing as they left the chamber behind. For in the hidden engine beneath the Earth, they had not just found machines. They had found the soul of a people who refused to be forgotten. The explorers had uncovered the core project, the hidden heart of Earth. They had seen the machines humming faintly, the stored seeds, the music, the art, and the records of unity. They had touched humanity's last great creation, and it had changed them. But as they returned to the surface, the weight of their discovery began to settle into something heavier. Questions. The ruins above seemed different now. The broken towers no longer looked like simple remnants of a fallen world. They looked like reminders. Every shattered wall, every silent street carried a lesson. Humanity had built greatness, yes, but humanity had also vanished. And that truth was impossible to ignore. At night, the explorers sat together under the stars, speaking in hushed voices. Their campfires flickered in the ruins of an old marketplace, where stalls once held food and voices once bartered for goods. The silence pressed against them. One traveler broke it first. They engineered their supremacy. That much is clear. They built machines, cities, systems that even we cannot fully understand. But in the end, they are not here. What does that mean? Was their greatness an illusion? Another shook their head. No, it was not illusion. It was real. But maybe it was fragile. Maybe power built by hands can also slip through fingers. The debate began there and grew with every passing night. Some believed humanity's story was a warning, that no matter how much a species builds, it can still fall. Others argued it was a guide, that fragility did not erase the value of creation, but made it even more powerful. During the day, they kept searching the ruins, trying to find more answers. In one corner of the city, they found a hall filled with stone tablets. On each tablet were carved symbols, arranged carefully in rows. They could not read the language, but the effort spoke clearly. These were lessons. These were truths humanity had tried to pass forward. In another place, they found walls painted with scenes of conflict. Battles, weapons, fire in the skies. Humanity had not been perfect. They had fought. They had hurt one another. The explorers realized that perhaps this was part of why they vanished. Supremacy built through unity had been real, but unity itself had not always been easy. One traveler stood before the faded paintings for a long time. "This is what I feared," they said quietly. "They built, yes, but they also destroyed. Perhaps that is why they fell." But another replied, "No, look again. Even after the battles, they built the core. They left seeds, libraries, and machines to preserve life. They did not end only with fire. They ended with hope." This debate carried on as they traveled. Each new discovery added fuel to the questions. They found massive canals cutting across deserts, proving humans had brought water to places that were dry. They found towers built to capture sunlight, evidence that humanity had harnessed the sky itself. And in the ruins of a smaller town, they found carvings of families gathered together, as if to remind the future that life was not just survival, but love and connection. The explorers grew restless. Each ruin was a mirror reflecting not just humanity but themselves. Their species had long believed that supremacy was inherited, that the strongest were destined to rule. But now, staring at these human remnants, they began to doubt. Perhaps supremacy was not destiny at all. Perhaps it was choice. On the 12th day, they found something that deepened the debate further. It was a message sealed within a chamber beneath the earth, a recording, somehow still alive with energy after 500,000 years. The voice was human, speaking in a language they did not know, yet the tone was clear. It was not anger. It was not fear. It was calm, filled with dignity. The explorers stood frozen, listening. Though they could not understand the words, the meaning was unmistakable. This was a farewell, but also a promise. Humanity had not left the world with despair. They had left with resolve. For hours afterward, the travelers sat in silence. None wanted to break the weight of the moment. Finally, one said, "Do you see?" Even in their end, they spoke of hope. That is not weakness. That is strength beyond strength. Still, others were not convinced. But where are they now? One argued. If they were so strong, if they were so wise, why did they vanish at all? Does not their disappearance prove their supremacy was incomplete? The discussion grew heated. Some argued that the lesson of humanity was that even brilliance could fail, that nothing lasted forever. Others argued the opposite, that humanity's true supremacy was not in how long they lasted, but in how deeply they shaped the world, and how far their voice reached through time. The ruins around them seemed to echo both sides. Broken towers whispered of fragility. Still humming machines whispered of endurance. It was as if Earth itself was presenting the debate, forcing the explorers to wrestle with it. That night, the leader of the travelers walked alone through the ruins. They stopped at a cracked statue of a human figure, its face worn away by wind. The leader placed a hand on the cold stone and whispered, "What are you trying to teach us? Were you warning us not to follow your path? Or were you showing us how to rise higher?" The wind moved through the empty streets, carrying dust and silence. The statue gave no answer, but the leader felt as though the question itself mattered more than the reply. The next day, the travelers gathered again, standing on a hill overlooking the city. The sun rose slowly, painting the ruins in gold. For a long time, none of them spoke. Finally, the leader turned to the group and said, "This planet is not simply a grave. It is a teacher. Humanity's rise shows us that supremacy can be built. Humanity's fall shows us that supremacy can be lost. Both truths are important. We must carry them both." The others listened, some nodding, some still wrestling with doubt, but all of them knew that this place had changed them forever. As they prepared to leave, the explorers carried with them pieces of stone, fragments of writing, and recordings of the faint voices they had uncovered. But more than that, they carried lessons. Lessons carved not in books but in dust and silence. They had come seeking knowledge. They had found wisdom. The ruins of Earth had whispered to them, "Strength is not given, it is made. Supremacy is not possession, it is effort. And fragility is not the end, but part of the story." And as their ship rose into the sky, leaving the silent city behind, the explorers knew they would never forget. Humanity was gone, but humanity's lessons were alive, in dust, in machines, in echoes that stretched across 500,000 years. The explorers had seen enough to fill their records 1,000 times over. They had uncovered ruins of cities, fragments of art, machines that still breathed faintly with life, and the great hidden core project deep beneath the earth. They had debated for days what humanity's story truly meant, whether it was proof of strength or proof of fragility. But as they prepared to leave Earth, one feeling weighed heavier than all others: reverence. The planet had become more than a place of ruins. It was now a mirror, showing them truths not only about humanity, but about themselves. And before leaving, they felt one last duty: to understand the legacy that had been left behind. Their ship circled the planet slowly, giving them a wide view of Earth from above. From the sky, the scars of human work were still visible. Canals stretched like veins across deserts. Great walls crossed valleys. Vast circular patterns lay etched into the land. Perhaps once farms, now only faint outlines. Even after 500,000 years, the mark of humanity was written across the planet's skin. The leader of the group spoke softly as they looked down. "They are gone, yes, but look at this world. It is not empty. It still carries them. They live in the shape of rivers, in the cut of mountains, in the order of stone and steel. Their hands are still here." The others nodded. They began to realize that humanity's legacy was not just the memory stored in machines or recordings. It was in the very fabric of the Earth itself. Every reshaped landscape, every built structure, every system designed to endure. All of it whispered of a people who refused to accept limits. When they landed again, it was in a valley surrounded by high cliffs. Here, they found something unexpected: a series of underground chambers carved into the rock. Inside were carefully preserved vaults filled with seeds, tools, and simple instructions etched into stone. Unlike the core project, which held advanced knowledge, these chambers held the basics: food, farming, building, survival. One of the explorers studied the carvings for a long time before speaking. "Do you see what this means? They did not only build for themselves. They built for anyone who might come after them. They did not know who would find this, but they wanted them to live." It was a quiet but powerful realization. Humanity's legacy was not pride, it was generosity. Even in their final days, they had thought of others, of future life, of strangers who might walk the earth long after they were gone. The explorers carried samples from the chambers back to their ship, seeds that still waited to grow, instructions written in lines of pictures that needed no language. Humanity had left behind more than memories. They had left behind gifts. For days the travelers could not stop speaking of it. Around their fires at night, they imagined what it must have been like in humanity's final hours. Perhaps the people had known their time was ending. Perhaps they had felt fear, sorrow, even despair. But instead of only mourning, they had worked. They had chosen to build something lasting, something kind. Think about it, one said softly. 500,000 years later, we can still feel their touch. Not because they conquered, not because they dominated, but because they cared enough to leave something behind. As their time on Earth neared its end, the explorers gathered all their findings into a single record. They created a great archive on their ship, filled with images of the ruins, sounds from the recordings, and stories they had pieced together from fragments. They knew they would carry this back to their own people, not as curiosity, but as truth. Before leaving, the leader suggested one final act. They returned to the core project, standing once more in the vast underground chamber where the machines hummed faintly. Together, they placed a small device of their own, an orb of light that would remain glowing for centuries. It carried their own voices, speaking of what they had seen and what they had learned. This way, the leader said, we do not only take, we also give. We add our voices to theirs, so that anyone who comes after us will hear not just humanity, but also those who witnessed their greatness. The orb pulsed gently, as though agreeing. When they left the chamber, there was a feeling of completion, as if two civilizations, one long gone, one still alive, had briefly touched hands through time. Their ship rose into the sky one final time, carrying them into the silence of space. From orbit, they looked down at Earth once more. The planet turned slowly, its oceans shining blue, its land still carrying the marks of human hands. The leader spoke quietly, almost to themselves. We came here seeking answers. We leave carrying their voice. Humanity is not lost. They are here, in every seed, in every stone, in every story that still breathes through the dust. And as the ship moved farther from Earth, the explorers knew they would never forget what they had found. For them, the lesson was clear. Supremacy was not about being born strong. It was not about conquest or possession. It was about persistence, about vision, about leaving behind something greater than yourself. Humanity had done that. Humanity had built a legacy that endured not in power, but in memory, in kindness, in the lasting shape of their world. 500,000 years later, the aliens returned to their own world with this truth. They shared the story of Earth, the story of a fragile species that had risen higher than anyone expected. And across their own lands, people began to ask new questions. If humanity could rise from fragility to greatness, what might they themselves achieve? If humanity could leave behind gifts for strangers they would never meet, what might they leave behind one day? The echoes of humanity began to ripple outward, touching not just Earth, but the stars. And so in the end, humanity was not gone. Their bodies had faded, their voices silenced, but their spirit remained alive in those who listened. The explorers had discovered the truth. Earth did not merely possess supremacy, it engineered it. And in doing so, humanity built something far greater than dominance. They built a legacy beyond time.